Beginning the sepia drawing for the Waterhouse piece entitled Boreas. I have set up my computer. I put a folder on my desktop with the 3 images that I have of this artist, the largest resolution I could find. And I set up my easel so that it's pretty much eye level with the photo on the computer so that I can glance back and forth quickly. I'm using the archival sketchbook and I'm not doing anything to the page. I have put it on the facing page of where I will be working on the portrait in color. So I'd like to have those, the study and the color portrait side by side. These are some supplies I've pulled out. This was done in red chalk, it says, by Waterhouse. These are Conti crayons, and you can buy a sepia set of Conti crayons. I think I'm going to mostly use a pastel pencil in the red sepia tone. It helps if you have a couple of values, but it looks like he just used one pencil, a reddish orange color. I also have a charcoal white and a pastel white and a Conte white. My blenders that I ordered, which I really like these, they hold up well. You could also use these soft blenders or tortillones to blend a little bit with. My small eraser, the tri-tip, that's pretty dirty. I could clean that off a little. I have a kneaded eraser and some of this putty eraser as well in case I need that. I did get the drawing glove out in case I want to keep from smearing, and I grabbed the little tube of white gouache in case I want to highlight something at the end. And that's all I'm going to be using. I'm going to start with really light strokes, and I won't be using all of this. In fact, most likely, I'm going to test these out on the paper, but most likely I'll use one of these. This one's a little bit too red. And one of the whites to heighten with. Doesn't look like he's used any white at all, but my paper is white, so that's going to make it a little bit more challenging. So there's also, I have pan pastel out. That's the only color I have, raw umber, but you might want to try and pan pastel if that's something you already have, or just a regular pastel would be fine as well. So already, I was trying to put a little bit of a tone on here with this soft pastel, but already I can see that this paper does not erase very well. So, may need to change my plans. This tri-tip eraser is actually the best eraser I think I've ever used for, it makes a mess, but it does get things off that are hard to erase. So maybe I will put a primer on here, a little bit of Zinsser with a little bit of marble dust in it to give me some tooth. Not necessary, but I just would like to see the difference. So I decided not to Zinsser it. I'm just too impatient, and it's a good lesson in checking your paper first to see how well it erases. I'm going to Zinsser the facing page when I start to do oil paint on it, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw on this, even though it's kind of messy. I'm going to go ahead and draw and see how I can fix it. I have 2 pencils, narrowed it down. It looks like he only used 1 piece of chalk, but I thought I might like to have it a little bit darker. So I've got these 2 pencils. I do have a white, and I'm going to go ahead and stick with the pastel since that's what I'm using. And I tested them out first on the paper. You can see right here to see, I erased it already, but to see how dark they were and what the color was. So get yourself all set up first. Make sure everything's, all of my pencils are on the white napkin here in front of my easel with my erasers. And I do have a bamboo skewer to measure with. And I'm going to make a few marks on the canvas and decide how many heads tall she is, how many heads wide. And then I'm going to look at some plumb lines, and I'm going to come back and show you how I get started. Okay, so you can see that I've done a little bit of measuring before I start drawing. I've put some very bold lines on this image, and all these segments represent a head length. So from the top of the head to the chin, from the chin to almost the bottom of her elbow, and from her elbow to the bottom of the page. Those are 3 heads tall. A little bit less than a half a head is above the top here. And that's not totally the top of her head. It's right where her scarf meets. Then she is 2.5 heads wide. So I put my light marks using my light pencil to draw with so it's easier to erase. And then on the angle, she is 2 heads tall from the top of her head to where her chin goes, and then from her chin to where the back side of her arm is. I know these marks look odd, but if you'll spend a few minutes sort of making a cocoon before you start drawing all this, because you've got arms twisted, you've got this big cape swirling around. The actual drawing is on almost a square canvas, and I'm using a 9x12. So my drawing is going to stop right about here to make the proportions even, or to make it the same proportion as the original. So I decided to lower it just a little bit, because when you're making these marks, you want to really take note of where they are. So this is the same line as this, and I still needed room for her arm, and I had it up here, so her arm would ended up going off the page. So I want to make sure that I can fit her arm up here and not run that off the page, because that's an important part of the composition. And then there's a little bit of this sash that's wrapping around the top of her head. And I probably could lower it a little bit more because I have room to do this kind of in the middle. So spend all the time that you need in the beginning on placement and measuring before you jump into the drawing. Don't be hesitant to erase and move things. Even if it leaves a mark, you can fix that later. You can fix it with more pastel, or even if we had to use gouache, we could fix it. Okay, and after looking at it a little further, I want to make sure that I have enough room on this side for most of that fabric. And you see how you just have a tiny bit here, and you have about 3/4 of the headspace here on this side. So make sure you look at this, spend enough time getting all this placement on so that it makes sense on this page and you don't run off. That's the biggest problem that most people have, and then when they're invested in the drawing, they don't want to start over. So if you'll just move around, she is 3 heads tall from the top of her sash, right where her arm meets. 1, 2, 3. And then she is 2 heads wide. Just keep your finger on that measurement. I'm just using a pencil right now. And about 3/4 or 2/3 room left over here, and about 1/3 left on this side of the head. And you can eyeball that. Also make sure and measure once, twice, 3 times if you have to, as many times as it takes. Diagonally from the top of her head to where her arm starts, and then down to the back of her arm. Those are 2 head lengths. A couple of other things that I checked are, where is the center? If I wanted to do this exactly as I see it, the center width-wise is right here at her eye. So I made a little dot there. And the center height-wise is right here on the middle of her arm. So you could make a dot on your page to figure that out before you get started, and put a little dot as well. You can figure out height and width. And that's about right with where I have this little line. Now I'm only going to here on my paper, so I can double check. And these are just good check marks that you can use throughout the whole piece. Just double check it, move it, and move it until you get it the right height. There we go. So that's the middle here. That is this dot. This is this dot for her eye. So those are just little checkpoints. You can also, you'll be using plumb lines as you draw, and then I'm just going to get started drawing. I usually on a face, I'll make a mark for the top of the head, the bottom of the head. I'm thinking about tilt. If I use a plumb line here, down through the center of her, the bridge of her nose, down to her chin. That tilt is about that angle. So I'm going to come over here, try to make a bit of a really light line on there, because the whole tilt, if you get that off, you're going to be struggling with it the whole time. If you want to double check it, You can hold your pencil and your paper, especially if you have this printed off. You can hold it up and just compare it to a straight line, and that's pretty close. I may have to adjust it as I draw. The plumb lines will help you correct that. So I'm just going to start with really short, light, broken strokes, sketching in. I'm going to go ahead and place about where I think her arm goes. I'm going to have to check the tip of her elbow and see what that corresponds to across the top of her head here. But it's easy to see this dark plane for her hair and about how wide that is. And usually the big dark areas, if you'll go ahead and mask those in, they kind of anchor everything as you're drawing. Again, I know this is the center. This is her forehead. Remember, you're constantly matching angles. Every line that you make, you need to look and match angles as you draw. Her nose looks like almost a vertical line. It's tilted just a tiny bit that way, so I can barely tilt it. I always like to put a circle on the tip of the nose just to give the fullness of the nose. There's a little curve right there. Again, I'm guessing with this, and I'm probably going to have to come back and adjust it. Typically, I like to measure and divide the face into thirds. So I'm going to say from her hairline to the bottom of her eye, from the bottom of her eye to the bottom of her nose, and the bottom of her nose to her chin are pretty much equal thirds. 1, 2, and that's not right, so I've got to make an adjustment somewhere. Hairline to bottom of eye, or let's say middle of eye to bottom of nose to bottom of chin is much longer. 1, 2. Nose needs to come down a bit. Okay, so those are pretty good thirds. Here to here, here to here, and there to the bottom of the chin is a little bit longer. So that gives me a little bit better idea. The bottom of the nose is almost horizontal because of the tilt. So I know I need to bring the ball of her nose down just a bit. There's a little dip that comes straight down from the center of her eye. So typically when you get the eye in place, you can use that as a guide for the rest of your lines on the face. You can use it as a plumb line. Don't worry about any details for the eye right now. You're just making marks for where everything goes. So side of nose and front of the lip all lines up with the center of the mouth, with the center of the eye. Go ahead and mass in any little dark areas that you see very, very lightly, and it's easy to go back and erase those, but they also help you know where you are. Check all these lines on this tilted head and see what's straight, what's vertical. Not much is vertical, but you can hold a vertical line up and see just how much of a tilt. So there's a little bit of a tilt to that chin right there. Once I get all these features down, I'm going to remove those marks so that I can see the detail a little better. Go ahead and mass in the darks around her hair. There's a dark edge around the base, the bridge of her nose. See how that helps already, just to get that dark masked in. And you can see there's just a little bit of space from the bridge of her nose to where her sleeve starts. It goes down even. It breaks angle there at her lip and turns and goes that way. How wide is her sleeve? Well, now that we have a little bit of the face drawn, we can go from the lip to the edge of the sleeve and see what that corresponds to. So I'm gonna say from her hairline to the top of her lip. So now I can come over from her lip to the edge of her sleeve. It's right here. Working your way from the center out. This angle of her arm is going to be easy to misjudge, so I'm holding a line up and I'm seeing how it dissects up through her face at an angle like this. And you'll have to adjust that because you know that's not a perfectly straight line right there, but as you go, just getting the overall angle for it. You can also use a plumb line here to see that her elbow comes straight up from the bottom of her sleeve here. Remember to check the bottom of her sleeve. It comes just under her mouth. So don't let me get that too low. Just under her mouth, maybe higher. Using a plumb line, that's going to come straight down. Elbow's not going to go out any further than that. The angle changes right here and starts to go more in a downward angle. Cuts back here. So what's so beautiful about this is the spirals in it. You see how the hand wraps around the head, and this hand wraps around the back of the neck, and the scarf, everything is in it is curving in spirals, and it just moves. Your eye moves all over it. So you want to be careful to not get too stiff with this, but to get all your angles right so that these spirals have a rhythm to them and they're not disconnected. I know it's hard to draw angularly at first, but a short broken line is more accurate, and you'll find that once you start blending and adding color, your lines will get softer and you don't have to worry about them being too angular. All right, I'm going to work a little bit more in here and then I'll come back. Okay, so I've made a few more judgments in distances here. The halfway mark between her eye, this head length right here, because remember these are the head lengths, from her eye to the back of her hood is right here. I've made a mark here. So that gives me a good idea for this little area here where the hood and the hand meet, because I was ending up with her hand being way down here. So you just have to move slowly through here to find all these little distances, and don't make any big judgments without really stopping to compare what else is on here. I had some trouble right here with her arm. So you're really going to have to look at this negative space right here in front of her forehead, because there was a tendency to bring her arm way over here, and then I had way too much space. So again, moving from the center of her face out in short strokes and really judging all your distances, looking for halfway marks, checking plumb lines, drawing in the darker areas so that you can see where your lines are, where your measurements are. Be sure to draw light. Be sure to, again, check your plumb lines. I can tell that I'm a little bit off. This point of this elbow comes straight up. Again, even with where the sleeve and the arm meets, if you follow it all the way up, there's not much to hang it on up here, but you could draw a line down through there on your reference picture. So as you have all these little marks, when I'm coming down here now, remember this is the back of the sleeve. So I've got the distance of the hand. There's a nice rhythm right here that I don't have to worry about drawing a hand yet. You certainly don't want to be about drawing fingers, or there's no real detail. This is a study for the painting, so he really didn't do a lot of detail. We can measure from the middle of the sleeve or the arm here where her bicep is. Bicep is to see what that compares with from the bottom of the chin to her eyebrow. So you can always stop and check and check your distances and see what they're the same as on your reference. And so I had that right, from eyebrow to bottom of chin, and from bottom of sleeve to top of sleeve, right here in the middle, is exactly the same. Also, looking at your measurements here, you can use negative space with the side of the page down here to make sure you haven't gotten too far off. I can go back and fix that later, but I can see where the thinnest area of her waist, what does that line up with on the original? It comes just over from here. So I know that that's about right. So use these plumb lines. They help so much. Before I make any decisions down here, I'm going to go ahead and work my way slowly with these folds in the fabric. You can see this darker area right here under the arm. Then you can see another area here. See this kind of round out. This little swirl of fabric comes out. If you want to double check that, go from the point of the elbow to where the eyebrow to mouth. And also the same as from the bottom of this fold to her waistline. So bottom of this fold to her waistline, right here. This, she's very small, so right here where her waistline is, you can check that and see what it lines up with. Comes out just here. So see, I have it way out here, which is going to make her look chubby. It's very, very small right through here, so you can use plumb lines to check that. And since we know where the elbow goes, because we checked that earlier, you can see how much space you need for this little dark area here. One of the things you're going to have to be careful with too is she's very soft, and so when I start out drawing like this, I have lots of angular lines that look harsh. So we'll have to work on softening those up. She'll look like a man. I'm going to oversimplify that right now. You can also use some negative space here to just go ahead and put where this scarf goes. And then let's work on her hand a little bit. It's a good idea to measure. Remember that the hand is usually the same as the face, the same size as the face. So if her hands were extended out, her fingers were extended out, you'd be just about right on target. So you're going to want to make sure that this hand is long enough, and you can see that it comes all the way out to here, just a little bit, about a fourth in from our mark there. You can also see how much space there is from the top of this hand, which is parallel with just under her eye. That's about right. And you can check from the top of this hand to the fingertips is the same as from her eyebrow to her mouth. You'll be amazed at how many things are symmetrical, are the same. Eyebrow to mouth, hand to tip of finger. So her fingers are going to come down to here. And that gives you the space for her hand. Typically, I divide the hand into the pad of the hand and then the fingers, and I make those one shape before I start defining the fingers. Her wrist comes over just about here, so that's where the angle starts changing for the pad of her hand. There's a little hump there. There's a lot of rhythm to drawing hands. This hump on the top, if you followed that, you notice that this one is almost like a braid. So there's like a rhythm like this when you look at the bones and the muscles. So this is this way, and this one's over just a bit. So here and here. It's a good idea to practice drawing hair braids, because that really helps you see that rhythm like this. The top of her hand is not completely horizontal. There's a little bit of a tilt to it, so you're constantly matching angles from that hump in her wrist to the first knuckle is the halfway mark. So hump in the wrist to the first knuckle is the halfway mark. So it's going to be a little bit longer before you come down. And then the halfway mark between that first knuckle and the tip of the finger is here. 1, 2 marks. It's easy to add that other finger on afterwards, so just find a good standard and go straight down through the middle of the hand. Then just use negative space to draw all these individual fingers. Looking at the shapes as if they were abstract. Don't think about them as fingers. Remember, the fingers are at an arch as they move around the tips of them. So we checked from that middle finger, we checked the distance, and that's what I'm using as my standard. So from her wrist to the middle finger is the same as from her eyebrow to her chin. So double check that a couple times before you invest too much in drawing all the details of the hand. All right, so I stepped away for just a second, and I can tell my angles are off on the arm and the hand a little bit. This hand starts to go downhill, and I have it going uphill. So that's going to mess me up for the width of the hand. So I'm using this tiny Mono Zero eraser to get in here on these small areas. Remember, when you're doing a whole figure like this, it's challenging to get it all on in a little space. So match your angles. Remember the halfway mark between here and the middle finger. So you're going to want to check that a couple of times. Middle finger and hump. Okay, so that's about right. Then it's going to go down. You can also check the width here where the middle finger starts in her scarf. Check that against something else on her face as well. Eyebrow to mouth again. How many times have we used that measurement? Eyebrow to mouth and middle finger to scarf. So that's about right. All right, so I'm gonna, now that I kind of have the perimeter mapped out, I'm gonna go back and draw more detail in here. Start shading a little bit. Come back in here and decide, let's see, like where does the arm stop here? So I can find the middle section from here to here. I have to figure out about where that is. Nope. It's just down from the middle. So here, just down, so about right here. And I can check it again with a plumb line. This little spot right here where the arm turns is just out from the eye about here. All right, so that's about right. She's got little small arms, so don't make those too big. And there's a lot of different angles on this elbow here. It's really beautiful and fun to draw. Once I get some of the detail drawn on here, I would really want to make myself do some rhythms here. In fact, it's probably not a bad idea to do that now and just see how things flow. There's a beautiful rhythm here. This rhythm. No wonder he had so much fun doing this. It had to be a fun exercise. And this is a study. This is getting us ready for the painting. So this does not have to be perfect. This is where you're working out all the problems. And get used to that. Get used to not trying to make everything perfect. Yeah, I have a good feel for that. I think everything's moving along. This could be adjusted. This feels like it's a little too low. So there's a real pretty swirl to that. Okay, I took the other measurements off now, and I've drawn some plumb lines on to check my drawing, because as I got away, I could tell that I had this too squished. From her hand to this hand, it was all squished and compressed. You can't see that sometimes when you're sitting too close to it. You can tell there's a really nice rhythm right here. So even if you just draw a nice curve right here and measure, measure. The measurement never lies. So from her wrist to her other hand, and I have a plumb line to show you about where that wrist should start. It's almost through the center of the face. So about right here. And then from the wrist to where the next hand starts is one length of her face. So her wrist to where the hand starts, and you see I have to move it up. It was way down here. So I need to move it up here and give myself a little bit more room for her head. And that's a common thing when you do figures, to make the head too small, and it always looks just really weird and creepy. So you want to make sure you have enough room. This is the widest part of her hand wrapping around her head, is right here where the fingers are. So you could measure that even with the eyebrow and see what that corresponds to. It is eyebrow to the mouth again, that same measurement that we keep finding over and over. So the highest place on the hand to her scarf here is about there. Match your angles, because again, that's where I mess up. I don't match the angles. I don't leave enough room. And if you have to get a big eraser and take it off, and if it won't erase all the way, that's okay. We'll go back over it with some white and correct it. You're never sorry for correcting your mistakes. Don't leave it and think nobody will notice, because that is absolutely not true. Again, you can kind of work on the rhythms a little bit. Matching angles is a constant thing you have to be aware of. I just almost have to draw this around with my hand to get that big enough, because it looks too squashed and compressed. And then that's going to put her hand up higher, a little bit higher. Her wrist and her hand. Remember, it goes down at the palm. Here's the center. And this one starts its way down. Light, light, light. Keep everything as light as possible. That's some better. I'm not sure it's 100% right yet, but we'll keep working on it. This is all about problem solving. And get up and take a break so that you can look at it with fresh eyes. She has her hand all wrapped in this scarf. So watch those rhythms. Like, notice how this wrinkle wraps right along around her chin. And her chin is a complete circle right here. So get that full enough. Check your plumb lines here from her elbow crease, from where her elbow bends to the tip of this elbow are lined up perfectly. So make sure you have that right. And I know I usually tell you to work in short broken strokes, but I think for these wrinkles, And because this is a lightweight scarf, I think just to get that rhythm, it's a good idea to do quick strokes like this. Soft, rounded strokes, just till you get that softness of the, it's even, when we start the painting, you'll see it's transparent, so you know it's really thin fabric. Just like sometimes when you start a drawing, if you'll just do quick gestures and circles, you'll get a much more accurate sometimes and rhythmic, looser drawing than if you try to measure too precisely, just for that first lay-in. All right, I got a lot of work to do on that hand, and I want to double check the height here, because that's going to be real important, from the top of the hand to where the next hand starts. So we'll say from the wrist, bend in the wrist to the top of this hand is the same as chin to the very top of her scarf. So that's about right. Something just still looks off to me. Okay, a couple things I worked out in between. I found that the Conte crayons, or little pastels, are a lot softer and they work better, but they're too thick to get these little delicate lines, especially around her hand. I was trying to do that with a heavy, hard line, a thick line, and it was just looking wrong. I erased it totally. I checked my distance here. I still may need a little bit more space right in here somehow, and I can adjust here with her scarf. But notice how I sharpened my pencil. Again, I'm using the light colored pencil, and I'm going to go back in there with a darker one. But I sharpened it to more of a point, and I erased my lines out so they weren't so bold. In such a tiny drawing like this, if you have a, like right here, I'm starting to get really too dark and bold, and it's standing out too much and looking too harsh for her. So also with the fingers, remember your halfway point from the wrist to the first knuckle, and the first knuckle to the tip of that middle finger is your halfway point. Keep that as your guideline to keep that hand in check. And also I divided, you can see the knuckles real clearly right here. He's got a little circle for the knuckles. It helps me to put circles where the fingertips and each of the knuckles go. And so I can see this little segment of the small finger. I can see this little segment of the second finger, and I went ahead and put a partial circle in there. Erase out your lines so that they're not so harsh and bold. The area around her features is really tricky. I have it too dark, so I'm going to have to make adjustments with that. The Conte crayon erases a lot easier, but you just can't get in there with the tiny details that you can with a really sharpened pencil. So don't let the fact that the paper doesn't erase good deter you, but just keep pushing on with it. I have these little blenders that we found and we talked about in the drawing classes last year. I have a little teeny tiny one that's a little bit smaller that I'm going to get out and use. They hold up pretty good. They're made to put alcohol on stereo equipment, I think. But they work really good to blend with. And I have a link for those on one of the newsletters that we did on drawing. I'll make sure to put that in the recap. So here's that small blender. You can see it's just got a really tiny tip. Almost like it's actually smaller than a Q-tip. And you can get in there and start to blend a little bit with that in these tiny areas. This paper, this archival Stillman Byrne sketchbook does not erase well. Possibly if I had prepared the surface, I might have had some better luck with it, but it's not erasing well at all. You could use a Zinsser prime. You could use a little bit of an acrylic prime, gesso. They have calcium carbonate in them, which is chalky. And I think it'll take, this is kind of slick, like Bristol board, I guess. And so it feels It just doesn't, or it's not good for drawing. It's much better for the liquid mediums, acrylic, maybe even watercolor. It says all medium, and it is archival. So I'm going to keep developing this a little bit more and using these 3 blenders and see how far I get. The pencils, the pastel pencils, tend to be harder, so they don't move around on the paper like the pastels do. So you may, if you have some that are almost the same color, you may want to switch and use a pastel just to get the blending done and help it move around on the paper a little bit better. Remember, this is a study for the painting. So try to make note of things that you can learn from this drawing so that when you get ready to, and if the drawing comes out really good and you want to transfer this for your painting, you certainly can do that. I'll show you how to transfer it. But don't get too stuck on making this the masterpiece, because again, this is the preliminary study. And it will help you more than you know to do this. Most portrait artists do a head study before they do the formal painting. There's a lot to learn from that. I have continued to develop these folds. I did decide to use 2 different pencils because this one was not giving me my darks. So I pulled out a brown. My first one was a little bit too reddish, and I wanted to be able to focus in on some of these strong lines around her face. You'll notice all the lines kind of shift and move your eye constantly around. So there's certain ones that are more distinct than others. The way that you shade is kind of important too. That kind of helps with the direction of the fabric. I just kind of copied a lot of his shading lines. I think that's probably all I'm going to do. I just wanted to get an idea of this drawing. There's some kind of little fold right here in the sleeve, and all the folds kind of go up to that. Just check your negative space and make sure that you've recorded the darkest areas that are moving the eye.